Done. So now we're recording. Thank you. So this is the beginning for us of a conversation around recovery services, understanding what that concept is. So I want to thank everyone for taking time to go through this conversation today. So just we have a brief agenda today. We'll welcome and introductions, updates, just some general things that I'm pretty sure many of you are asking about. And then we'll talk some about recovery services. And with the time that's left, we'll take as many questions as we can. And then if we need to capture some additional questions and share those out, we can do that as well. So, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to our parents for all that you have done. Um, you know, I, you guys really are the heroes of this point because you are, some of you are working full time jobs, you are, supporting, helping with schooling throughout the day. You've been Santa Claus at Christmas. There's so many things that you've done throughout the course of the last 10 months and you will continue to do. And so we just want to say thank you. We acknowledge that what you do, and even for parents of students who with a disability, it's even a more unique situation. And so, as a parent, no matter what, I think about myself, and even with my parents, I'm 50, but I was telling my team earlier today, I kind of stubbed my toe on Christmas Day, and my mother was just like, "Oh, do we need to go to the emergency room?" I mean, she went into full mother bear mode, and I'm a 50-year-old woman. So, again, as parents, your jobs never stop, no matter how old or how young your children are, no matter where they fall on the spectrum, your job is never ending. And so, just a thank you. Um, for I want to go back and say, just with us today, my supervisors, Natasha Smith, who supports with elementary and early childhood, Tiffany Gauthier, our secondary supervisor, Janae Hayes, our administrator for ATPS and supervisor that supports our program classrooms. And then there are some other individuals that I could not do this work without, and I wanted to acknowledge them. Our program consultant, Lorna Adams. Maybe Lorna, say take your self off mute, say hello so you pop up on everybody's screen.
Hello,
Um,
everyone. Welcome today.
Thank you. And then our teacher consultants, same thing. Jenny Wardell, Heidi Medill, and Don Schultz make sure that we are continuously able to provide that continuum of support. So I wanted to say thank you to you guys. And Jen Lamar, I see you there. I didn't forget you either. She ensures that while Janae is out helping the other buildings, that ATPS continues to run smoothly. So thank you. Some updates. And I was like, I cannot bring everyone together and not talk about a couple of other things. And so I'm just going to, right out the gate, talk about the elephant in the room, which is when are we coming back to in person learning? And so we have been working with our, specifically our program classroom teams around developing some plans so that no matter whether the district is in remote, if we are in hybrid, if we are in person, that we have some better options for students. And so we hope to be able to share some more specific details about that. But it's our hope that before this month is over, that we will have students with some of our most severe needs back in buildings receiving some support. And that might look different for different students in different programs, in different classrooms, in different buildings at different levels. And so it's important to remember one of the key pieces of the IEP process is that term individualized. So as we begin our return to in person learning, every student, what happens with every student will not be exactly the same. Um, so just remember that, but we are working to bring as many students back as possible, um, given the conditions. And one thing that I was just talking about before yesterday, the last few days of numbers for our state have been around maybe 2 to 3,000. Yesterday, that number inched up beyond 4,000. And so know that one of the things that we have been talking with teams about is if things, don't begin to trend in a better direction, if the district, for whatever reason, would have to stay in remote, how can we offer some in-person opportunities for some students even within the midst of that. And so that is kind of our next iteration of what happens if the district has to stay in remote learning. How do we provide some additional support to some learners that have some truly, truly unique learning needs and learning styles? Vaccine updates. I'm sure by now everybody has heard that um, the next phase outside of, those direct healthcare workers of vaccines being available to individuals that are over the age 65 and those that work in schools, we can begin to schedule those appointments. And so that hopefully will help us in our process. But one of the things is that there is still limited availability for vaccines. So even though we can get it, really having access to it, if someone is able to get an appointment, sometimes it still might be a bit out. And so uh, Dave Coulter, the Oakland County executive, I saw something today where he, is trying to work with the state level to get more vaccines to Oakland County so that we have more access. Um, and for some individuals, I think it goes by where you live or work. So if you work in Oakland County but live in a different county, then maybe that gives you a couple of, additional windows of opportunity to attempt to get the vaccine. If you live and work in Oakland County, like I do, then you're more limited in what opportunities you have to be able to get that vaccine. Spring IEPs, I just wanted to put that on there to say that as we roll, we are continuing to move forward with our IEPs. We will continue likely to do those virtually. And virtual IEPs might become something that becomes even more of a staple as we move forward beyond this particular school year. Um, it's important to note, love, people say, oh, I can't wait for things to return to normal. I'm going off on a tangent here. I'll just give you that little tidbit. I can't wait for things to return to normal. And I'm thinking, well, there are some things that, have emerged as a result of this that I don't want to go back to the way it was. I like the fact that now when I go to Target, they have cleaned my cart off for me. I don't have to clean it myself, right? I like the fact that they've beefed up their pickup service and I can just put my order in and pop my trunk and they bring it out to me. So there are some things that after we leave from this, I want to keep. And I think even in terms of how we provide instruction, how we collaborate, there may be some things that we do differently that we weren't doing before the pandemic as a result. So it's pushing us in some ways to think about things in a new and exciting way. All right. So now on to the good stuff, recovery services. So I'll say back in July, right? The Michigan Department of Education, this was right after the governor's committee had put out their, great magical return to learn plan, what happens in, when you're in phase 1, 2, and 3, and what happens in phase 4, 5, and 6. And, here are the cleaning protocols, and this is what you need to do in this particular phase. There was the sense, I believe, at that time that by the time September came, we will be back to quote unquote normal. Um, Unfortunately, that was not the case. But that guidance around recovery services was really about taking into consideration that when buildings, school was still open last spring, right, but buildings were closed, students were learning in a different way. Was there any impact to students because they were essentially forced to learn remotely instead of learning in person? And so this concept, the phrase, I'll say anyway, of recovery services is not written in IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's not in the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, but it is something that is considered a recommendation from, excuse me, the Michigan Department of Education. So it's really them saying, we know that it's not written in the law, but in a good faith effort to give some additional support to students that may have been pretty severely impacted as a result of not being able to access in person learning. Um, are there any considerations your district wants to consider for that student? And even I'll say this before the Department of Education came out with this. Last spring, these were things that we were talking about in cabinet, right? Because again, at that time, we were, I think, still under the impression that this wasn't lasting as long as it had lasted, right? So I think we're still thinking, by June, this is, we'll be done. So, last April and May, we were talking, well, maybe over the summer, we'll offer some opportunities for students, this sort of thing. But again, this is extended a bit longer. But with the new hope that we have with vaccines, now available, we are hopeful that at least by, late spring, summer, there would be some more opportunity to do some additional things for students that may have been impacted. So again, the main purpose of recovery services is around, were there any students that, because of not being able to access learning, the in-person learning modality, that they have been severely impacted in terms of their growth, or if there has been some significant regression in their skills as a result of that. Um, Part of what the Department of Education guidance talks about is looking at a data review to make the determination of recovery services. And data review is not a new concept for IEP teams. Oh, I love it, Jen. I love when I see guests that come up. um, Data review for the IEP team. This is what we do. This is what IEP teams live and breathe is data, right? This is how we make decisions about what programs are we offering, what services are we offering, how much service do we give, when do we give that service. So looking at data is really what we're doing. This is simply saying, let's also look at that, take that same data and see if we need to look at what that impact has been, and can we utilize that same set of information to say, what, this student could potentially benefit, or we do see that there was a significant gap and there is a need for some quote unquote recovery, or I'll call it supplemental support, to help with the fact that they were not able to access in person learning. Again, which is very different from ESY services. These are typically around when a student has not had any access to learning at all, right? So, over a break from, when we were just on winter break, when we come back, teachers are collecting data. Where were students with their skills before we left? Where are they now? Was there any regression? what was, if there was regression, how long did it take for them to recoup those skills versus was their growth slowed because they did not have access to their typical modality of learning. So that is kind of the basic difference between ESY and recovery services. So, recovery is really about, because of the pandemic, because students, even sometimes just the in and out of in school, out of school, the back and forth, has that had an impact on the rate that they have been able to grow in comparison to how gen ed peers have been growing, right? So the data may show that gen ed peers rate of progress is just as slow as special ed, right? So the data may show that they are kind of on par for the rate of growth with their peers, and everybody might be growing at a slower rate this year, which again is different than gen ed peers moving faster, but then special ed moving slower as a result of um, remote learning. Now, so RCS, how are we addressing recovery services? So one of the things that you heard me say was that initially when they came up with this concept, it was based on that they put a time period in of through March 2020 through June of 2020, because in at that time the thinking was that we would have been done with this by then and been out of it. Um, so I've asked our team to expand that a little bit because we've been in this a little longer. To let's look through the end of the first semester, see what kind of impact things have had on students, and let's begin to develop, what students we think would need some recovery services. And then once we've identified those students, then we'll begin to talk about um, what those services might look like for students. It's important to note that recovery services is not the same as compensatory services. So this is not saying that, they missed, a hour of service, so they're going to get an extra hour of service. That's not what recovery services is. If there are some situations where students have not been receiving services, um, we know that services might look different in remote learning, but if they've not been receiving services, let's talk about that. Talk with a level supervisor, with myself, and we can work through that process that's different. But recovery services might look like, and these are not etched in stone. Please don't leave here and say, Concetta said that my child was going to have a summer 2 week camp for ELA. But it might look like we might have a elementary or a lower L ELA summer camp. We might have a social skill something, right? We might say, you know what, this student having some access to an online program over the summer to work on at their own pace independently might be beneficial and supportive to help close that gap for them. It might be, this student may be having some speech sessions over the summer or some kind of way, or participating in this particular activity might be beneficial for them. So, again, what exactly recovery services will look like will certainly vary from student to student because of the student need. But once we have identified who the students are, then we'll begin to talk about what those services would look like for individual students. Um, Again, we've talked about what are we looking at? We're looking at, has there been some significant regression in that student, or has their rate of progress been exceptionally slower, than their same age peers. Okay. I've talked about that. We're, like I said, currently looking at what those services might be, and when those services would be provided according to the guidance. And again, remember, these are not hard and fast timelines because they're not written in the law anywhere. But the goal would be to have the services completed by September 30th of 2020. And again, hopefully by then we'll be back to um, truly more in person than remote learning for all students. And I believe that is it. We've talked about regression and recoupment. But if there are so, and I'll say this last bullet point, right? So let's say we've looked at the data, and maybe there are some significant things that are, new information that the team has acquired or new data that we have. The IEP team might need to come together and reconvene that IEP and make an adjustment in the programs and services for the students based on the data that we have. The IEP process is a fluid process, and so that's earlier when I talked about we're always looking at data. So if the data that's presented to us says that what we've currently written as an offer of FAPE isn't appropriate for the student, we might need to make an adjustment based on what we know about the student, but that is not intended to make up for some loss. It's really about understanding that this data tells us where the student is functioning, and we need to make sure that our offer of FAPE is in alignment with what the student needs are. And I believe that is all that I have. So I'll stop sharing and take questions that folks may have.
Uh, Kinsetta, there's a question in the chat. Can bad grades from marking period 1 be thrown out or reevaluated?
So I know that the grading committee has been working on some potential uh, I'm looking for the right words, opportunities to readjust some things with grading. So I think some information is coming from the grading committee on what can happen with grades, but that information has not come out yet, but that is coming.
There's a follow-up. Not sure, but it reads, how are the kids chosen for eligibility? I'm not
I'm,
sure.
I'm
Eligibility
assuming
of what?
I'm assuming that means eligibility for recovery services. And if I see Miss Wheelock shaking her head, yes, like, yep, that's right. So the team has a checklist that they will go through and look at data. There are some key points that they will look at with students. As a parent, if you say to the team, if I'd like for you to consider this, you're perfectly fine to reach out to your team and say, I want to make sure that we consider recovery services for my student.
Another.
I'm sorry, Janae.
No, go ahead, Tiffany. Take it away.
So there's another question. What metrics can or will be used to determine the need for recovery services?
So there are, I think, several different metrics that will be used, and it will depend on what metrics we have available for students. So elementary students, we know that iReady data is something that they have been using. So that is one metric. We might be looking at, it could be some Fontes and Pinnell. So we'll be looking at this using the same data points that we typically look at with students um, to see how they're performing in comparison to others within their peer group.
So, Concetta, since parents are members of the IEP team, what is RCS plans to provide the same data the rest of the team has to be able to make informed decisions about recovery services?
The parents should have, be able to see and understand and talk, work through that, talk through the data with the team. So if you feel like you haven't gotten, the data from the team, that's part of the process, is really to have all of that data there and accessible, so that as the team is talking through that, everybody has the same information. No more questions? I know it's been a rough week, hasn't it? That much I do know. I'm just happy that everybody showed up today. Thank you. All right, I won't hold you hostage.
We have a couple more questions coming.
Okay.
How can a team have data to determine a student's to determine a regression if my child hasn't been on Zoom to participate?
So that might be the team might look at, so maybe that might be part of the data, right? That there might be an assessment. Maybe they set up a time to give an assessment to collect some data before making that determination if there is no current data available. So as a team, you can talk through, what particular pieces of data or information you need. This PowerPoint will be made available. It is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with our PAC chair so that can also be shared with parents who are not able to attend today. Am I missing anything?
It's a couple coming in.
Okay.
You're just moving around.
Another question is, what use has the district made of State CARES Act money dedicated to parent training and support? How are these funds being utilized?
That is a great question. I I can honestly say I don't know if we've specifically used State CARES Act money for parent training in the district, but I can investigate to find out. If there are I'll say there's some specific trainings that parents are interested in. We'd be happy to partner with PAC and Ann to present some things on particular topics to parents. I know that we did do some, if I'm not mistaken, some social emotional things with the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities for parents earlier. But that's all that I can think of at the moment. But I'll put that on my list. So I'll update that question at the next PAC meetings.
There's a question. When will the assessments start happening? I'm sorry if I was already late for this. And I'm wondering if they're meaning or referring to assessments in regards to assessing students for recovery services.
I believe so. The assessment window, and Lorna, can you help me for iReady is
January 11th until February 12th.
so.
And so that's one piece of data and one assessment.
Yep, but I'll say some of the others might be already ongoing as part of the classroom curriculum and things that we're doing on a regular basis, such as maybe a Fontes and Pinnell or some other things of that nature. The even assessments within for some of our special ed students that are doing language live and what's the math one? I'm drawing a blank.
VMath,
VMath. Thank you, Lorna. Yes.
Inside Algebra.
Yes. Yep. Even if they are taking common assessments for students that are in gen ed classes, that's a piece of data that we're looking at.
Consetta, there's another one. In terms of the metrics needed for recovery services and cross-data interpretation, will the data for ECSE students be compared with the data for their typical peers who were able to remain in person this year?
Can you tell I'm stumped? So I think, and the reason I'm like hemming and hawing on that question is, do you mean within the district or outside of the district? And I'm thinking that question even from a national level, right? When we look at our nationally normed assessments that we're giving, some students have been in remote learning since March of 2020, and we're taking those same assessments. So I don't know how much differentiation there is in the data around where students were learning when they took particular assessments from a nationally normed perspective. And if that didn't answer it, let me know. Me and this group is quiet today.
Those are all the questions.
Okay. Well, if there are no more, if I'll say this, if you have more questions, I think everybody on here knows how to find me or how to find us. So please do not hesitate to reach out. Um, Please, I know 2020, as I said, has started off rough. Hang in there. My theme when we started in this was "We are stronger together," and I am sticking by that. So we are stronger together. We will get through this together. And thank you for all that you have done. Bye, guys. All right, Carrie, I'm removing you, not because I'm gonna meet with the supervisor. So, but you must be busy. But thank you for joining us. Oh, all right. Allison, did you have any questions before? And Kim, uh, do you have a question before we remove you guys? I'm gonna meet with my team for a little bit after. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kim. We made it. I can't hear you, Janae. Let me
Would you like
stop
us to
recording.